So do we really need UML? Complex applications need collaboration and planning from multiple teams and hence require a clear and concise way to communicate amongst them. Next point is businessmen do not understand code. So UML becomes essential to communicate with non-programmers, essential requirements, functionalities and processes of the system. So if any businessman do not understand the code, he or she can use the UML. And using that any UML, non-programmers, whatever the essential requirements are, functionalities are, that they can collect those information and model it using UML. And the third point is a lot of time is saved down the line when teams are able to visualize processes, user interactions and a static structure of the system. Okay, UML is linked with object-oriented design and analysis. So if we talk about object-oriented design and analysis, UML is linked with that. UML makes the use of elements and forms associations between them to form diagrams. So diagrams in UML can be broadly classified as structural diagrams. What is structural diagrams? Capture static aspects or structure of a system is known as a structural diagram. Structural diagrams include component diagrams, object diagrams, class diagrams and deployment diagrams. We will see it in the next slides. Next is behavior diagrams. Behavior diagrams capture dynamic aspects or behavior of the system. Behavior diagram include use case diagrams and interaction. Use case diagrams, state diagrams, activity diagrams and the interaction diagrams. These diagrams comes in the category of behavior diagrams. And this is the hierarchy of diagrams according to UML. So there are two types of diagram, behavior diagram and structure diagram, as we have discussed in the previous slide. Further, this behavior diagram is divided into four categories: activity diagram, interaction diagram, state machine diagram and the use case diagram. Further, interaction diagram is divided into four categories: communication diagram, interaction overview diagram, sequence diagram and the timing diagram. And the structure diagram also is divided into categories, that is known as class diagram, composite structure diagram, component diagram, deployment diagram, object diagram, package diagram and profile diagram. These are the diagrams, and this is the hierarchy of diagrams according to unified modeling language. So object oriented concepts used in UML. What is class? We use class objects in the object oriented concept. So what is class? A class defines the blueprint, that is structure and functions of an object. Objects helps us to decompose large systems and help us to modularize our system. So modularity helps to divide our system into understandable components so that we can build our system piece by piece An object is the fundamental unit, or we can see the building block of a system, which is used to depict an entity, which is used to show an entity. Another feature of the object-oriented concept is inheritance. Inheritance is a mechanism by which child classes inherit the properties of the parent class. So there are so many types of inheritance, multiple, multi-level. We will see it later. Abstraction, mechanism by which implementation details are hidden from user. For example, if there is a car, when we apply brake, the car is stopped. But we do not bother about what is the internal system of the braking system, what are the description of the internal braking system. We do not bother about that. So that is, implementation details are hidden from the user. Next is encapsulation, binding data together and protecting it from the outer world is referred to as encapsulation. The next is polymorphism. Polymorphism means a mechanism by which functions or entities are able to exist in different forms. For example, if there is a plus operator and we are using two numbers for the addition, so this is simple number addition. But if we are adding data and structure to strings using that same plus operator, this will be known as a string concatenation. So this is the example of the polymorphism. Now the structural UML diagrams. The first diagram is class diagram. The most widely used UML diagram is the class diagram. It is the building block of all object-oriented software systems. We use class diagrams to depict the static structure of a system, and we show the system's classes, their methods, their attributes. So class diagrams also helps us to identify the relationship between different classes or objects. Next is composite structure diagram. We use composite structure diagrams to represent the internal structure of a class and its interaction points with other parts of the system. A composite structure diagram represents relationship between parts and their configuration, which determine how the classifiers such as class, a component, or a deployment node, how their configuration, which determines how the classifier behaves. They represent internal structure of a structured classifier, making the use of parts, ports, and the connectors. We can also model collaborations using composite structure diagrams. They are similar to class diagrams, except composite structure diagrams represent individual parts in details as compared to the entire class. Okay. Structural UML diagrams. So there are some more diagrams. Object diagram. An object diagram can be referred to as a screenshot of the instance in a system and the relationship that exists between them. Since object diagrams depict behavior when objects have been instantiated, we are able to study the behavior of the system at a particular instant. An object diagram is similar to a class diagram, but there is difference. It shows the instances of the classes in the system. We depict actual classifiers and their relationships, making the use of class diagrams. On the other hand, an object diagram represents specific instances of classes and relationships between them at a point of time. Now the component diagram. Component diagrams are used to represent how the physical components in a system have been organized. We use them for modeling implementation details. Component diagrams depict the structural relationship between software system elements and help us in understanding if functional requirements have been covered by planned development. Component diagrams become essential to use when we design and build complex systems. Interfaces are used by components of the system to communicate with each other. Now the deployment diagram and the package diagram. Deployment diagrams are used to represent system hardware and its software. So we can say that deployment diagram is related to the system hardware and software. It tells us what hardware component exists and what software components run on them. We illustrate system architecture as distribution of software artifacts over distributed targets. An artifact is the information that is generated by system software. They are primarily used when a software is being used, distributed or deployed over multiple machines with different configurations. So this is the use of deployment diagrams. After that, package diagram. We use package diagrams to show how the packages and their elements have been organized. A package diagram simply shows us the dependencies between different packages and internal composition of packages. Packages helps us to organize UML diagrams into meaningful groups and make the diagram easy to understand. They are primarily used to organize class and use case diagrams. Now the behavior diagrams. If we talk about the behavior diagrams, there is state machine diagrams and activity diagrams. State machine diagram is used to represent the condition of the system or part of the system at finite instances of time, its behavior. Diagram, it represents the behavior using finite state transitions. State diagrams are also referred to as state machines and state chart diagrams. These terms are often used interchangeably. So simply a state diagram is used to model the dynamic behavior of a class in response to time and changing external stimuli. The next diagram is activity diagrams. We use activity diagrams to illustrate the flow of control in a system. We can also use an activity diagrams to refer to the steps involved in the execution of a use case. We model sequential and concurrent activities using activity diagrams. So we basically depict workflows visually using an activity diagram. An activity diagram focuses on condition of flow and the sequence in which it happens. We describe or depict what causes a particular event using an activity diagram. Now the state machine diagrams. A state diagram is used to Now the use case diagram, sequence diagram and communication diagrams. So what about use case diagrams? Use cases are used during requirement gathering and analysis to represent the functionalities of the system. Use cases focus on the behavior of the system from an external point of view. A use case describes a function provided by the system that yields a visible result for an actor. And what is an actor? An actor describes any entity that interacts with the system. So use case diagrams are used to depict the functionality of the system. A use case is basically a diagram representing different scenarios where the system can be used. A use case diagram gives us a high level view of what the system or a part of the system does without going into the implementation detail. Now next is a sequence diagram. A sequence diagram simply depicts interaction between objects in a sequential manner, that is the order in which these interactions take place. We can also use the terms event diagrams or event scenarios to refer to a sequence diagram. Sequence diagrams describe how and in what order the objects in a system function. These diagrams are widely used by businessmen and the software developers to document and understand requirements for new and existing systems. Communication diagram. A communication diagram is also known as collaboration diagram, and it is used to show sequenced messages exchanged between objects. A communication diagram focuses primarily on objects and their relationships. So we can represent similar information using sequence diagrams. However, communication diagrams represent objects and links in a free form. Okay. Now the timing diagram. The timing diagram are a special form of sequence diagrams which are used to show the behavior of objects over a time frame. We use them to show time and duration constraints which govern changes in the states and behavior of objects. Interaction overview diagrams. Next. An interaction overview diagrams models a sequence of actions and helps us simplify complex interactions into simple occurrences. It is a mixture of activity and sequence diagrams. So, interaction diagrams are used to formalize the dynamic behavior of the system and to visualize the communication among objects. They are useful for identifying additional objects that participate in the use cases. We call objects involved in a use case participating objects. An interaction diagram represents the interaction that takes place among these objects. Thank you.